Hello, everybody. Fourth video of the day. Dave Neal here, stand-up comic host of Bachelor Nation News. Susie Evans defends Jess as Jess makes her exit on last night's episode of The Bachelor. And we have other alumni calling out Zach's behavior. Very interesting to see alumni who know how the show works still call him out. So clearly they've see what he's done as egregious. Follow me on Instagram at DNeals. Patreon.com/Dave Neal for behind-the-scenes bonus content. And this afternoon, like every afternoon, Bachelor Rush Hour, the podcast. Go check that out. And let's get into it. Nick says that's 2 weeks in a row now that Zach was a total dick to one of the women. It's literally all about the one-on-one. And you could also say that Zach was kind of a dick to Anastasia as well. So we have Greer, Anastasia, and Jess all receiving the short end of the stick. He made Jess feel like she messed up for expressing a valid concern. And again, not to harp on this, but we discussed this, let me find here, with Dr. Diane Strakowski. And I know some have accused me of being an armchair therapist. There's no way, and we preface this in our conversation, there's no way we can watch an edited show and make diagnoses of the actual people. We're not making a diagnosis of Zach. We're looking at what he's doing on the show that we watch and discussing what we may see. And I say we, but that's me interviewing an expert. You know, it's so funny. You interview someone, if I'm like, oh, I feel like Zach's coming off like a narcissist, which I don't believe, but if I said that, people would say, how dare you, try to label him a certain way. You're not a professional. So then I get a professional, Dr. Diane Strakowski, and then how dare we do this? I was called problematic. It's just so funny to me. It's funny to me. You know, and obviously you can't win with people, but we're learning a lot about ourselves. That's what this is all about. We're learning about ourselves as we see how Zach reacts. And, as Dr. Diane says, you learn what kind of, we're all like tea. You learn, excuse me, what did she say? We're all like tea in that you learn a lot about yourself when you're put in hot water, right? Like your flavors. So anyway, we'll get to what Nick said in a second because Nick roasted Zach. And I would say my conversation with Dr. Diane actually gave Zach a lot of empathy when we discussed it. So we'll get to that in a second. But Susie said, someone had asked, Jess was right and Zach shouldn't have gotten his panties twisted in a pretzel. Susie's response, I feel like Jess understood Zach's perspective, but he didn't understand her side as much. Or maybe he just didn't validate her feelings. It's hard to say since it's probably not the full conversation shown, but I really respect Jess for not begging anyone to love her. She knows her worth and has every right to want to feel chosen and want validation on her feelings. We don't beg for any man's attention or love. Woo! Go get them, ladies. I really like Zach and Jess, but glad they figured out they aren't a good match. So the question is it that they're not a good match, or is it that Zach's not doing the work to truly understand them? And again, we're watching an edited show, but here's what Dr. Diane said, full interview on my podcast.
Same thing. Is he a narcissist? Is he a diva? Is he entitled? Is he being disingenuous? I'm getting all those questions. And to tick those off, I don't think he's a narcissist because truly a narcissist really kind of uses people in an unkind way. And we've seen Zach have a lot of empathy for the people that he likes. People have asked me.
All right, so there it is, folks. All right, so let's go to, people are roasting Zach, as we saw last week with how he handled Greer. We discussed it ad nauseum, and now we see how he handles Jess, and we say, okay, is there a pattern, or is this all just the same edit? Anti-hero, The Bachelor 2023. Fans slam Zach as the villain of his own season after cruel comment during fight with Jess. And, of course, she left there bawling. And Nick did not, of course, I'm sure what we get a lot with recaps, and Nick will tell you this, is what we get a lot of quick responses. And then when we have long-form conversations, whether it's a women tell all or if Nick interviews Zach, we'll find out that there's a lot more of a nuance to it all. With that said, when we watched Clayton's season, Clayton got lambasted by people, but I never personally saw Clayton as a bad guy, or I never saw Clayton as he internalized a lot of his emotions. But with Zach, I'm seeing sort of him twisting things around to make it so that he's not the bad guy. He essentially makes it like he's jockeying for a position of control. That's what I talked about with Dr. Diane, in that after Jess essentially walks away from him, he's like, I had to let her go. Did you let her go, or did you put her in an untenable position so that you know, you made it easy on yourself to then dismiss her.
Yeah.
Like, how does this affect you in future relationships? How can I be a supporting partner to you in the future?
Totally.
None of that ever with any of these conversations.
No. And if there's any present day weakness, you're out.
No, he's really, and well, let's get into Jess, because Zach is, I like him.
Me too.
He seems like a nice guy. I haven't met him in person.
Sure.
He seems like a gentleman, and
Yes.
I think he's trying really hard.
trying is really hard. I think he has good intentions, but he's really starting to come across like a guy who's terrible at empathy, and instead of he's making these women feel bad for feeling.
They're shaming for sure. I mean, even like they're shaming for feeling, and even like when Brooklyn did like the fist bump, like anything that's silly. When Gabby gave him a nickname in the beginning, like, can I call you Zach? He was like, no, it's Zach. Like, you're like, okay.
Yeah, he's
like,
not goofy or
no,
fun or like.
I've been saying the same thing. I've been seeing the same thing with Nick here, is that Zach's not fun. He's kind of sucking the energy out of the room. When Greer's like, oh, I like to look at myself in the corner of the Zoom, he's like, why do you do that? He doesn't, and it's, again, I'm sure he's a pleasant human, but he doesn't realize that he's not coming off funny. He's coming off like a dick. And it is a fine line to walk sometimes. Trust me. It's a fine line to walk, but you feel what side you're on, funny versus dick. You feel what side you're on based on how the other person reacts. And I think he doesn't realize when he's crossed over into dick territory.
And all relationships are about checking in and saying, hey, listen, like, feeling a little like uneasy about this. Can I talk to you about this?
Yeah.
And Zach is portraying a type of partner where he's like, no, you can't doubt us. You can't question me. And if so, then like this isn't working for me.
Well, like Bailey early on, I thought Bailey had a chance to go all the way. And the second she was like, hey, I just need a little reassurance. He's like,
No,
yeah, you're
done.
out. You're out.
Yeah.
Great point by Arden right there. Great point. He's kind of like the mafia. He's like, yeah, you're either in the family or you're whacked.
And then Jess, at first I felt like she was, she's first out of the limo, covered in glitter, sweet little beautiful baby bird. Baby bird is quaking, and he seemed to like that. He was like, oh, I got to protect my baby bird. And then it's like, okay, this is not sexy fun time. You didn't learn how to fly on your own. Like,
I was optimistic though, because it felt like on group dates he was the one pulling her.
And he told her about his diagnosis out of the blue on a very early group date, which is
where he
something
almost died.
he said he'd never shared with anyone.
yes.
Yeah.
So it's very confusing.
Her statement when he caught her in the car, she was so right. She was like, if I'm supposed to marry you and you seem completely baffled that I would want any alone time with you, like, he had no sympathy.
He was so outrageous in that moment.
Oh.
It was, so first he was like, she sits down and she just calmly she doesn't, she knows that Zach is easily rattled. So she's trying to like express her doubts without letting him know that like, there's anything wrong. So she's tiptoeing around Zach and he does it, his head nod thing.
I can't.
He's got, he does that thing. And then he goes to Jess when she was like, well, I'm just feeling like a little, I guess anxious or insecure because I haven't had some like one-on-one time. And he says to her, well, that's something I needed to know. He like lectures her.
Yeah.
Yeah, he goes from at the beginning of the convo saying, I think things are great with Jess. And then when he ends it saying, it just wasn't there. So all of these, in a lot of people say, oh, it feels like piling on that we look at this and we criticize Zach so heavily. But we're watching somebody in real time, at least on the edited show in their real time. We're watching them, Zach, twist and contort the reality into a way that makes him the protagonist. And then we watch it and go, God, you ever watch a movie where you're like, who the hell's the villain? And then all of a sudden you're like, I think Zach's the villain. Totally agree here.
And it's just like, he sounded like a guy who Valentine's showed up or her birthday and he completely missed it.
Yes.
And then she goes to her boyfriend and says, yeah, that kind of bothered me. And he's like, oh, well, that's something I could. You could have fucking told me that you wanted a card on Valentine's Day, that you wanted me to acknowledge your birthday.
Yeah.
You could have
and
told me
made
that.
her feel superficial and shallow because like the way, because I did feel like towards the end of the conversation, because she kept having to repeat herself, being like the one-on-one, and I felt like he made her sound kind of. She didn't sound bad in that conversation, but he did make her sound almost like petty or specific because he was being so obtuse about this one basic fact.
And he wasn't worried. Jess wanted the one-on-one because as a student of the game, which we've talked and other people have discussed, she recognizes if you don't get that one-on-one in the first 6 weeks, she's realizing in real time, I haven't been broken up with. It's almost like this. You're up for a promotion at your job. It's between you and someone else. If you don't get that promotion in the first 6 years, you're not going to get it. And at the 6-year mark, this other person gets the promotion. You haven't quite been fired yet, but you understand there is no conceivable way you're going to win this thing. So Zach could have kept her around. If he knew the next date had Jess's name all over it, he could have kept her around. She just wasn't it. And he needs to reckon with himself and reckon with that idea that she wasn't a top contender and let her go on those terms, or you hate to say man up, but, find a way to have that difficult conversation versus the cowardly thing that seems like happened, which was Zach let her be irrational in his eyes and said, oh, this just isn't going to work out.
Which is also, it is literally all about the one-on-ones. Zach knows this.
I mean, he was after he was about to go out with Ariel, and he was like, "Oh, I didn't get to know her till the one-on-one." It's like, yeah, shit.
No,
like,
he literally tells Jess that it's not about the one-on-one and acts completely obtuse and
shocked.
oblivious.
He's like, what is this about a one-on-one?
What, one-on-one? Like, how could you? What do you mean?
He had the same energy of talking about how could you bring up a one-on-one that he did when the conversation about followers happened.
Yeah.
Like it was the same.
It's exactly what I'm saying. So we have Bailey on the followers, Anastasia. We've got Jess. We've got Greer. Who's next? It's all the same story. And again, look, in the end, Zach will benefit from watching this back and realizing there's a group consensus that he's handling it wrong, because no one wants to be in a marriage or relationship where you're right all the time. You can be two things in life. You can be right or you can be in a relationship, but you can't be both, because there are going to be at times when you need to bend. And I know, there's probably times where it's very hard for me to bend on a situation, but you have to understand the other person has whatever their set of beliefs are, and you've got yours, and there's always a compromise, because you'll never see perfectly clear on all different topics. And when it comes down to something as simple as what we have with Jess, which is a love language, the love language of quality time, she understands she's not going to get that on a group date. It's so clear to her she's not going to get it, and yet he says, why do you want all that? Well, worry less about why she wants it, Zach, and worry more about how you can help water her plants or let her go so somebody else can. Let me know what you guys think. That's going to be it for me today, unless there's any other wild breaking news. I have a flight to catch, but I'll be live, and you can catch me with all my behind-the-scenes content on the Patreon. And this afternoon, as always, we have Bachelor Rush Hour. All the day's news chocked and squeezed into one quick, digestible episode this afternoon. Go check that out. We got a lot of great content coming your way. You're not going to want to miss it. We'll talk to you later. Bye, guys.